So our next guest will be Aditya Kishor. He's the Insight Director at WARC, and he will infuse on us some creativity. And he told me also a little bit of culture. I guess a lot of culture. So Adi, please, the stage is yours. Let's give him an applause.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Aditya Kishor. I'm the Insight Director at WARC. For those of you who aren't too familiar with WARC, we are an organization entirely focused on marketing effectiveness. So we bring together news, information, metrics, benchmarks, analysis, frameworks, tools, really anything we can to help marketers make their campaigns more effective and their strategies more effective. We've been doing this since 1985. We're present all around the world. We work with some of the biggest brands. We work with some of the biggest agencies, creative, media, etc. About a year ago, we, along with the Association of National Advertisers, which is the body for brands in the United States, and Cannes Lions, which is one of the most prestigious awards for creativity and hosts the Festival of Marketing, which is a big event in the marketing industry. These three organizations kind of came together and launched this study on building a culture of creative effectiveness within brands. The goal there was to try and understand how do you make a brand be more creative or value creative, invest more in creative. How do you build that belief so that it helps in terms of marketing effectiveness? Now, one of the starting points for this was to recognize that there's actually been a lot of research around marketing effectiveness and the impact of creativity. So I won't go into each of these studies, but we know that creativity helps with efficiency. We know it's a driver of profitability. We know it is the single biggest contributor of campaign performance. We know that there is a direct link not only to market metrics, but to actual commercial success of an organization over time. We know that investing in better creative quality helps lift campaign and brand metrics. We know that it's much more profitable, and we know there's a direct link to return on investment if you have quality creative. And these are studies that have gone on for about 10 years. So there's plenty of evidence, plenty of data. And yet, we find that only that 25% of marketers this year were planning to reduce their investment in creativity. Only 12% believe that they can sell the value of creativity to their CFO, and just 28% see creativity as business critical. Now, these are marketers. These are not people in the C-suite or corporate boards. These are people who are actually on a day-to-day basis commissioning and creating advertising. So the question for us was, why is that? Why is it that we have all this evidence that creativity works, that it acts as a force multiplier in the effectiveness of advertising, and yet there's so little faith in it? And the answer actually is that you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't sell it in, if people don't believe in it within an organization, then you're never going to be successful. And this is a quote from Peter Drucker, who was a big management guru back, I think, in the 80s. So it was true then and it's true now, that the culture of an organization, the beliefs within an organization, are far more effective at making something happen than whatever strategy or idea or proof or evidence you come up with. So these three organizations, WARC, the Association of National Advertisers, and Cannes Lions, kind of independently identified the fact that in order for marketing to be successful, or at least maximize its potential, you need to have effective creativity. But in order to have effective creativity, you need to build that belief within a brand, within the brand organization, that buys into that. And that is a complex exercise. One of the challenges we faced was, okay, how do you then go out and measure how do you build this thing? And of course, the goal would be to try and create a quantified model and have specific indexes and all of that. But first, we needed to really work with a set of definitions that's actually quite difficult to crystallize. What is culture? What is creativity? What is effectiveness? Especially within this context. And so in order to do that, we decided to do kind of a phase one, which is to look at this qualitatively and create a basic framework to kind of understand what are the moving parts here, what are the key elements, and how do you build on that? So step one, we're in the fortunate position at WARC to have a product called WARC Rankings, where we rank campaigns based on their performance on a bunch of metrics, on effectiveness, on creativity, on media efficiency, things like that. So we looked at those lists and we identified campaigns that had been very successful, brands that had been very successful in terms of creativity. They'd won lots of awards, they'd been seen as very effective creative campaigns, and then we looked at effectiveness. What were the campaigns that were delivering high ROI, who were delivering on the metrics that that the campaign had been set up on? And we looked at the leaders there, and then we combined those two and said, okay, who is delivering both on creativity and on effectiveness? And we took that pool and we reached out to them. And we had a number of in-depth interviews with the leaders in those organizations to say, what are the systems that you have? What are the processes that you have? How was your journey? How did you end up building these things and setting them and ingraining them in your organization? Where are the challenges? Where are the pitfalls? And then we also did a sort of control group where we interviewed a more random selection of brands, some of who had performed in terms of effectiveness, some in terms of creativity, some in terms of neither, to get a sense of, okay, what are the differences? Where are the sort of gaps between the performers and the control groups? And then we went back and kind of reviewed some of the initial work, got an additional round of feedback, calibrated that, and then finally developed the framework. So the framework that we put together at its sort of very high level, very simplest level, is basically 3 layers. It's align, which is make sure that at the top of the organizational pyramid, your CEO, your COO, your CFO, your board understands the value of creativity, understands how it works, not just for brand metrics, but also for business metrics, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second is build. You need to create systems, you need to invest time and resources in creating the processes and the structures to make this work. It's not going to happen on its own, and it's not going to happen from a handful of emails. And lastly, and this is where most brands tend to fall down, is actually embed it into your organization. Really get the people at the front line to believe in this, and that comes through training and workshops and belief. But that is really critical because CEOs will come and go, and they will change the business to suit them. But if you've actually built this into the thinking of people in the front lines, at that point it becomes very difficult to get rid of. So it really starts to embed in the organization. And these are also the people who are going to be implementing this on a day-to-day basis. So definitely that's something to consider. These 3 layers break down into sort of 6 building blocks, 2 per layer. So this is just going a little bit deeper into the model. You have vision and alignment, which is really CEO focused. It's sort of saying, okay, or C-suite focused, I should say. How do we work with our top management and convince them that creativity is important? And the key to that is getting more research, more data, consistently going to them and showcasing successes, making sure that they start to understand certain elements of that. And we'll go into this in a little more depth in a minute. The second is metrics and evidence. And actually metrics you'll see all over the place. They're part of almost everything because you need to start measuring as much as you can. But metrics and evidence really is focusing on what is it that you're going to measure. Not specifically because that will change and will vary, but what is a broad understanding and agreement around what defines creative effectiveness? How do you measure it? How do you define it? That agreement needs to be reached. The second level is what we call creative effectiveness operations, or CREF ops. And that's the blueprint. Like I said, this doesn't happen on its own. You're going to have to spell it out. You're going to have to create the systems. Somebody has to be responsible for driving it through the organization. People have to have specific responsibilities, and they have to be measured and incented to deliver on those. Fourth is the common language. How do you evaluate creative? It's very difficult, right? Some people might like something, some people might not like something. So the organization has to develop some kind of consistent structure in terms of how they evaluate creative and how they evaluate the effectiveness of a campaign. Now there's a couple of different ways in which brands have done it. Some have ladders, some have a scale, but it requires a lot of communication and a lot of workshopping to make sure everybody's thinking consistently, looking for the same things, and evaluating in a consistent manner. And at the bottom layer, as I said, the embed is a really tough one. One of the key elements we found was partner inclusion. Every single performer brand we spoke to said that they had a long-standing and trusted relationship with their agencies. So it's very important that the partners that you work with, and they could be tech partners as well as we move, as more and more sort of digital, it's understanding it's making sure that they understand you. So it's building a trusted relationship, seeing the agency as a partner, making sure they understand what you're trying to achieve, and having them kind of be part of that process. And then lastly is the global diffusion part, where you really need to sell this idea globally across not just regions, but also brands. If you're a large multinational with a bunch of different brands, it's different levels of the organization, so that everybody understands this, everybody understands what's being done, what the goal is, what the roadmap is, and how to get there. So I'm going to dig into each of these a little bit deeper. When we look at vision and alignment, the important things are, of course, communication with the CEO. And we know that only about 50% of boardrooms, only about 50% of board members actually have any understanding of brand building. So it's very limited. We sort of assume that people get it. They assume they get it because marketing is simple, right? You just put a bunch of ads out, everybody comes and buys your stuff. But in reality, that's not quite how it works. So a critical part is educating your C-suite about brand marketing and the values of it. Build trust with the CFO or with the finance team. A lot of senior finance leaders see marketing metrics as a bit suspicious. They don't really trust them, they don't always believe in them. It's some sort of secret sauce that marketers come up with, and then you're supposed to fund that. So one of the ways in which marketing teams can work more efficiently with finance is to build that relationship, bring them into your own analysis sessions. One brand we spoke to, one CMO we spoke to, actually hired a finance professional to come in and basically translate, to be that bridge between marketing and the finance team. And they've managed to build a lot of trust with that team so that their CFO is now talking about brand building and how valuable it is for the company. So there are ways in which that can be done. The third thing is you really need to prove to them that creativity works, and works not in terms of brand metrics or in campaign metrics, but in terms of the metrics that the CEO cares about, which is sales, revenue, profitability, shareholder value, market capitalization. These are the kind of terms that marketers need to, or at least CMOs need to start becoming familiar with and being able to communicate with their boards so that they can build that credibility, build those relationships, and really drive marketing at a strategic level. So in some cases, it's looking at research that exists outside, but in other cases, you might need to actually do some custom research. So, I mean, McDonald's, for example, has publicly talked about how they commissioned Les Binet, who's a well-respected sort of researcher in the advertising business, to do some work around McDonald's data, because their financial team told them, yeah, this stuff is all good, but we need to sort of McDonaldize it. We need to see it from a McDonald's point of view. And so they were able to kind of do that. So in some cases, you may actually need to invest in specific research that is aimed at convincing the C-suite that creativity works, creativity has an impact. The second, as I said, share more data with finance. Let them know how you are arriving at conclusions, be more transparent, and look for links between what they're doing and what you're doing. A critical element, of course, is understanding the language of business, which is understanding the language of the C-suite. So really plug into some of that. There's a framework called the Value Framework, which was developed by the IPA, which is the agency body in the UK. This is from a strategist called Frank Cassidy. I won't go into it. It exists. It's online. You can Google the Value Framework. But it's a tool that is designed to help marketers engage better with the C-suite, to be able to communicate more effectively with what they want to do. Okay, the second element was metrics and evidence. And as I said, metrics are kind of everywhere. You may need metrics to convince the CEO. You're going to measure everything that you do. But the clear sort of element in this tool is that link between business metrics and brand performance or creative performance. So you have to build that kind of chain of logic from creativity to effectiveness, campaign effectiveness, brand effectiveness, to business output, sales, revenue, profitability. Those kind of, that link has to be put in place, and you have to agree on that. So the C-suite and the marketing teams, marketing organization, have to agree that this is how we will define creative effectiveness, this is how we will measure it, And if we achieve these things, then we are successful. Now, specific elements of that will change as you operationalize it. But that agreement on what are we measuring and why it's valid has to be done at this stage. The other thing that's really critical, I mean, one brand we spoke to said, only 25% of my brand spend this year is having an impact this year. Normally, brand investment has a much longer term return. So you're looking at timescales of maybe 18 to 24 months for brand investment. What you're spending today is going to affect you next year and perhaps the year after that. What you're living on today is what you spent last year. Now, that's not in a CFO's mindset. That's not how CEOs look at it. So an understanding of that time scale is really important. CFOs understand capital expense. They understand long-term investment. But you have to make sure that they see marketing that way, because that's not naturally where marketing sits. It doesn't sit in their capital budget. So how can you make that work? I mean, again, you do research, you commission research. Market mix modeling and econometrics is becoming increasingly more important in marketing. More and more brand marketers are taking on MMM and econometrics. Typically, it's used just for media expenditure. So they're looking at the media investment, the channel selected, and the effectiveness and the ROI there. But more and more, the bigger brands, and certainly the performer brands, are saying, how can we incorporate creative performance into this? How can we look at campaign performances, creative effectiveness, and be able to measure that using modeling? And then, of course, as I said, very, very important to explain timescales for marketing, as well as things like indirect effects. One of the major sort of impacts that brand marketing has is you can justify price increases. So this is, again, I'm not going to go too deep into it, it's a bit confusing, but at the fundamental level, what this is a study by 7 Stars, which is an agency, and they looked at an average of CPG brands, consumer brands that you would get in stores, and they looked at what happens if you cut down on brand spend over time. So what they found is that initially, of course, you save some money because you're not spending it on brand advertising. So that budget comes back to you, you've got that money. But what also happens is that your customers start switching to store brands. So a lot of supermarkets have their own private label brands. They're usually a little bit cheaper, and consumers start shifting to them. Now, in the first year, the shift is not that much, partly because you're living off last year's brand spending. So the brand is already established, but it starts to weaken. And then in succeeding years, you can see how much of a switch there is. So actually, you're saving relatively little in terms of brand investment, but you're losing a lot because of that switch to private label, because your brand is not justifying that price again. That's an indirect effect of brand advertising, which works extremely effectively and is very important. Let's move to the build layer. This is really the hard work, right? This is the mapping, the planning, the blueprint of how all of this is going to come together. So somebody needs to take ownership of it. In all the performer brands we interviewed, we had somebody, in either an individual or a team or even a sizable team, that was responsible for making their marketing excellent. And effectiveness, creativity fitted into that role. It's also understanding because certain things will have to be done at a regional level, at a brand level. This has to be pushed throughout the marketing organization. So it's understanding who's responsible for what, making sure that they're incented to do the job right in the way that they need to, and then training them and providing them with the tools and the playbooks to be able to deliver that. There are a number of brands that have done this and have published what they've done. So PZ Cousins, for example, has a wheel that they use. Nestle has a blueprint. Diageo's done some work in this area. Heineken has a creative ladder. There's various brands that have done various things, which are public. They exist in the public domain. So there's a lot of learning that exists. And the other thing that's very important is kind of having a roadmap, because this will take years to build. It's a large operation. You're not going to go from 0 to 100 very quickly. So what's important is to help everybody understand what the goal is and have a structured timeline and roadmap to get there. And what we found is that roadmaps help. So this is, again, research from the IPA that shows that you're having a roadmap, having a plan, helps people believe in that culture, helps people believe in marketing effectiveness and creative effectiveness by 26%. So a quarter more people are going to buy into this idea if you have a clearly defined roadmap. And then the other 4 lines are basically just breaking that down. So a lot of it comes from focus. People have a clear focus on that goal, and that affects the way that they work. People, in terms of hiring and training, you're sort of training along that roadmap, so you're bringing people into that. Data tools and measurement, you're building metrics, you're building systems that can help you do that. And then processes and systems as well. The whole organization starts to swing around to support that capability. So it's an important kind of element in the mix. A common language is kind of an interesting idea because, as I said, creativity is difficult to measure. It's difficult to fully understand in an agreed way. It's not so easy to say, oh, this is an ad, everybody thinks it's brilliant. But the key is to kind of understand, how do you evaluate creatives? What is the way that everybody within the organization looks at a creative, looks at an ad, and values it? And it's then applying that process or that thinking, that philosophy consistently across creatives and measuring them and using the same metrics. Now, different brands have different ways of doing it. Some have just a simple 1 to 5 scale. Others have quite a complex ladder, like Heineken has a very complicated 10-step ladder for evaluating an ad. AB InBev has a spectrum. So they've all got their own tools for how to do that. But the way to make it work is to make it consistent, and you make it consistent by workshops and trainings and discussions and evaluations so that it seeps through the organization. The other thing is pre-testing. And again, it's bringing in pre-testing, evaluating an ad before you sell it, before it goes out, to understand what it means and the implications, and potentially learning from that. So a brand like Mars, for example, has really developed their pre-testing. They've got a AI-based platform that takes in all the data from previous campaigns, the campaign performance, pre-testing scores, and now they can sort of start to predict and really measure the effectiveness of a campaign even before it goes out. So there are some tools that can be developed in that area. So there are scales that already exist that you can adopt. There are creative assessment boards that a lot of brands are using, and that's bringing a bunch of creatives or a bunch of marketers together and creating this sort of team that evaluates all creatives in a consistent way. There are, of course, various technological tests for pre-testing. You can do neurological or emotional tests to see kind of emotional reactions and measure those. And then there's, building sort of predictive tools based on that data. So that's a longer term exercise where you build a database of campaign pre-testing performance and then in-world performance and compare the two, and then you start to hone your pre-testing tool to the point where it can start giving you predictions that are somewhat effective. Right, the last layer is embed, and this is where you really need to make it work, and this is the tough one. This is the toughest part. The relatively easy side of that is actually partner inclusion. And that, as I said, every performer brand had a very close and long-standing relationship with the agency. So it's building that relationship, seeing them as partners, improving your briefs. Most strategy briefs are seen as poor by agencies. So it's making sure that you develop a framework for briefing that is much better. You build a strong relationship, you help them understand what your goals are, what your roadmap is for creative effectiveness, and incent them in the same way. So the payments and the agreements that you have with them are aligned to your goals. Look for agencies that have a creative track record, that have delivered on creativity and value it. Support their work, because if you're asking somebody to come up with something that's creative, that's different, that's out of the box, and then you just keep rejecting it or letting it go, then that's not going to keep anybody happy. So you've got to fight for those ideas internally. You've got to support them, and they have to trust you and know that you will perform them. And then, as I said, align them with your own KPIs. Help work with them to develop that relationship. This is some research that we've actually done with a company called Appraise. So Appraise looks at agency-client relationships and how effective they are across a bunch of metrics. And they compared their data to ours on effective campaigns or brands that consistently deliver effective campaigns. And as they found, the top brands, the top relationships delivered the best results. So brands and agencies that had strong relationships were the ones that were much more likely to produce highly effective campaigns. Now this is a really tough bit. This is making sure that everybody on the front line of the organization actually buys into this idea of creative effectiveness. And this needs a lot of work. It's the toughest part, and it's literally sitting down, working with your entire organization, making sure everybody gets it, making sure everybody engages with the idea and buys into it across the bottom of the pyramid. So this is your frontline workers. And in some cases, we've seen that this spreads outside of marketing. So this sort of ideas around creative effectiveness, some of the thinking and the processes that have been put in place actually start to seep into things like customer experience, innovation teams, as well as sales, finance even, start to look at how can this be applied in other parts of the organization. Things that have been effective is a lot of training, a lot of conversation and discussion, creating a lot of documentation, things like that. But part of it is also celebrating successes. When something works, make sure everybody knows about it. There should be awards, there should be town halls, there should be a lot of communication, both within the marketing organization and outside. So that kind of positive reinforcement for the team. And then lastly, it's looking for ways to collaborate on major ideas. So they shouldn't just come out of the central team. They should be spread across so that everybody has a chance to contribute, everybody has a chance to be involved, everybody has a chance to develop some of the basic big campaign ideas that then go out to market. We see kind of 3 phases of this global diffusion. One is to push it through within the brand, within the marketing organization itself. So you sit down with your own marketing team and you make sure that it syncs all the way through to the lowest level within marketing. The second is you start to engage at least the successes and the things that work with some of the teams that are contiguous, that are around you. Sales, product development, customer experience, start pushing these ideas into them. And then the third phase is when you actually start involving those teams in the same process. And they actually start picking up these ideas and pushing them through. Right. Now in terms of how a brand gets there, what that journey is, we found everybody starts in a different place. There are a lot of different ways to get there. But we found that brands basically fell into 4 different quadrants. One was sort of on the top right, inconsistent. These were brands that almost always had a strong culture of creativity. They were typically record labels, TV channels, movie studios, and they were very creative. Everybody believed in creativity, but they weren't very good at measuring it. And they weren't very good at understanding what creativity is effective and how you can make it more effective. Below that, obviously, were the people who were just starting out. So they were just beginning their journey, or they hadn't even started, they didn't really have much of a plan in place. On this side, you had the underpowered. These were folks that understood the value of measurement. They were very good at measuring, and they were very good at looking for effectiveness in their advertising. But they didn't really understand the role of creative. And so they were losing out on this sort of force multiplier, this boost button that you can get with really high quality creative. And then finally, the top right quadrant, which is where everybody wants to be, these were the brands that were performers. They were creative and they were effective. And they were measuring and working on those. But to get there, we saw very different journeys. So relatively few, I will say, were creativity driven. Relatively few started off with a great belief and investment in creativity and then worked their way into measurement. Very few went all at once. They went straight for that quadrant. They said, okay, we'll do creativity and measurement and we'll do it at the same time. Almost everybody went this way, with sort of a couple of exceptions. Almost everybody we spoke to started off with saying, look, media is something we understand. How to invest in media is quantifiable. So let's start measuring the efficiency of that. And then as they went along, they realized that creativity is this wild card. The same investment in media yields different results. Why? Because of creative quality. So that's how they ended up in that quadrant. One of the things we're advocating is this system of effectiveness. The idea being that you create a culture that believes in creativity, that believes in measurement and effectiveness, and then you use that to drive the right investment. You buy and invest in the right things that give you the best return, and then you have the right ways of measuring it. You choose the right metrics that measure the right performance indicators, and then that feeds back into your culture and your belief system, and eventually you have this virtuous circle. So to end, brand, the value of creative is not fully recognized. The contribution of creative to marketing effectiveness is not fully sort of seen, at least not across the global organization. Global meaning not just in terms of regions, but up and down as well, and side to side within the business. Where people start this journey, start working towards creative effectiveness, can be anywhere. It varies a lot. Everybody has their own sort of path. But if you do develop it effectively, then this can not only help marketing, it can start to seep into other parts of the organization as well. The key to this is making sure that this goes across the organization, that everybody buys into it. And so in a sense, the marketer's role is not just to sell to customers, it is first to sell within the organization, to use the same skills and capabilities that you have to convince your organization to buy into these ideas. And lastly, brands should, in our opinion, start to work towards this system of effectiveness, where you have the right beliefs, the right philosophies, the right values, and you feed that into the right investments and the right measurement, and then that feeds back into your beliefs and ideas. That's it from me. Thank you very much. If you're interested in learning more, we have a stand at 16B on the other hall, just in front of the stage, so you can get more information there. And if you want more information on this topic, that QR code will lead you to a page that lets you download a sample report. So you'll be able to get more information on that. Thank you very much.